again. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Friday's webinar with myself, Anne Stanley, and Sukh Singh. Sukh is going to do a presentation on what's new in SEO, and particularly looking at the Google page experience update and also the Core Vitals update. I'm going to quickly go to the polls, and then I'm going to pass over to Sukh, as we have lost a little bit of time at the beginning of the presentation. So I will read the poll out, as that will come through into the recording. So hopefully you can all see the poll now. Can you see it, Sukh?
Yes.
Okay. Are you or anyone in your team responsible for SEO and increasing your organic rankings and traffic for your company? No, I'm not working for a business at the moment, or I currently work in another field like paid media or PR. No, the business I run or work for is not carrying out SEO, although we do need more traffic to our site. No, we do not carry out SEO because we're an established brand and already get a lot of traffic. Yes, I'm responsible for SEO and work on this myself. Yes, we have a team who's responsible for SEO and I work with them. Yes, someone else is responsible for SEO and I need to understand what they do. Yes, we use an external freelancer or agency to help. Yes, I am a freelance or work for an agency that helps. Okay, so the most popular answer at the moment is yes, I'm responsible for SEO. We have 46% say that. And then the next one is that they are responsible for a team. And also they have a team and they work with them. And then there's a few people that work for a business that hasn't done any SEO, so they're at the start of their journey. Excellent. That's a really interesting mix of answers there. And then the second question is really about the level of your expertise, and hopefully you'll be able to see that one now. What is your current level of knowledge about SEO? And if you'd like to include, your knowledge about core vitals in there, that would be useful. None. I've no knowledge of the basics of SEO, but realise it's important. Basic. I understand that SEO involves technical SEO, key phrase content, link building, etc., but I don't really know much else. I'm a bit of a specialist, so you could be an on-page SEO specialist involved in content creation. You might have a specialist role involved in PR, or you might be a technical SEO geek. You're more advanced. You're generally responsible for a bit of everything, or you're a freelancer or an agency, and you help with other businesses. Okay, now that's really interesting. So we've got about 70% say they've got a basic understanding that technical SEO and all those elements are important, but they don't really have a lot more knowledge of that. And then there's another 10% that say that they are specialist or sort of more advanced. So you've got a bit of a mix there.
Okay.
So that's a really interesting survey. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass over to Sukh. I'll try and help with the Q&A as we go along. So if you've got any questions or anything in the chat, please do put information in the chat. Also, you'll notice at the top right, there is the handout. So the slides are there already. And then finally, I'll reappear about 5 to 10, so that Sukh will know that he's got to hurry up, or we've got loads of time for questions. Okay. Good luck, Sukh. Speak to you later.
Thanks. Hi, guys. Yeah, thanks for joining us and bearing with me while I was trying to cluelessly figure out how to start this webinar without Anne. So that's how you know how much we rely on Anne to sort these things out. So yeah, thanks for joining us. So yeah, I wanted to talk about a few timely things, a couple of timely Google updates, one that has passed already in March and one that's upcoming in mid-July, and take a broader look at the reason for these updates and relate them all back to things that we should be doing already. So it's the typical SEO consultant finger wagging time of yeah, we should have been doing this already, so this is what we can do in the run up to and after the update to kind of make sure we're all on the same page with Google and our users in terms of making our websites as usable and user friendly as possible. So I'm just going to obviously do a quick intro about me and hopefully skip over that because it's not that interesting, and then talk about SEO quickly. And then I'm going to go into the main topic of this talk, which is Google's page experience update and what it is and how it's why it's important to us. And then I'm going to take a deeper look into a part of that page experience update, which is mobile first index. And then I'm going to take another look into Google's core web vitals. So I'll explain a bit of that in more detail a bit later. And then we'll hopefully have some questions at the end for me, technical or non-technical. And I've got my colleague Brad in the chat as well to help throughout with technical answers as well. So feel free to ping your questions down as you talk, as I'm talking, and then either Brad will answer them there and then, or I can just address them with you later on. Cool. So quickly about me. So if you haven't joined the webinars before or joined any of my webinars, so I head up SEO at Anika Digital. I've been doing SEO for roughly about 10, 11 years. I've been at Anika for about 7 years. So myself and Brad, we focus on SEO projects from developing SEO strategies through to implementing the SEO work, and we do a lot of technical SEO work, international SEO, and a lot of website launches and migrations. So we've got a mix of technical and kind of non-technical SEO strategy work that we do. Lead generation, e-commerce SEO across the board. And yeah, I'm that annoying guy on Instagram who posts his Fitbit updates. So a bit about Anika. So we have a lot of experience with clients who build and manufacture their own products. So much so that our teams across the board, from content writing to PR to paid social, paid search, and obviously SEO, we're all familiar with these industries to the extent where we know exactly how to kind of, for example, set up websites and the considerations for those types of users in terms of lead generation or e-commerce, what kind of experience they would need on a website, and that feeds back through to, as I said, content, and then how to push that content through, content marketing and PR and paid social and paid search. So across the board, it's one of our unique selling points that we're quite proud of, and we're also more so proud of the long-standing client relationships we have. Sorry, I'm just turn my phone over. Get calls at the wrong time. So our long-standing relationship we're particularly proud of. So those are some of the brands we work with, and yeah, the proof's in the pudding. Basically, we enjoy working with them, and that's one of our unique selling points. So just jumping into the slides then. So we're going to look at the broad look at Google's page experience update and what it means. So I'll take a few snippets from this official quote from Google. So page experience is a set of signals that measures how users perceive the experience of interacting with a web page beyond its pure information value. And it includes core web vitals, which we'll go into a bit later, which is a set of metrics that measures real-world user experience of loading performance, interactivity, and visual stability of landing pages. It also includes other search signals. So core web vitals is a search signal, a ranking signal. The other ones are mobile friendliness, safe browsing, HTTPS, which is a secure website when you see a padlock on the browser, and intrusive interstitials, which is always a mouthful. I hate saying that one, which is pop-ups that block content and are quite annoying. So we'll go into that a bit more sort of later. This broad update more focused on core web vitals because the other ones below that have been implemented over the past years. This will take effect from mid-June. It was originally intended last year, and then it got pushed back due to sort of COVID, and then it was scheduled for May, got pushed back further, so now it's mid-June. So we've had plenty of time to work with our clients to fix these issues. And Google has made an effort to actually update people as to when this update's kicking in. They don't usually do that. So, oh God, I forgot every time I say Google. my phone wakes up. Let me just turn it off completely. Right, game face, let's do this. So going into why we should care. So so yeah, it's pretty important. So there's some examples of, obviously, you've been frustrated going on a web page and finding that it loads slowly, or when it is loading, this is particularly happens on publication websites or really busy websites, where you go to click on something and then the thing that you want to click on moves around, or you click on the wrong article or the wrong call to action. So any frustrating user experience you can think of, Google's trying to categorize these in a way that it can then measure them and help us improve them. Because the ultimate goal, obviously, for Google is that it needs to maintain the quality of its product, its search product, because it makes a lot of money off the paid aspect of it. And in general, it's in its best interest to keep people coming back. So in order to do that, it needs to make sure we care enough about this to fix these problems. So it's making a real effort to tell us about these issues. So why should we care specifically? For SEOs specifically, it means higher rankings if we do meet these usability standards. So we can see a direct impact in rankings and how we measure it. It's keyword visibility scores. And then we can also measure it by engagement. So if they're likely to, if they're having a good user experience, they're likely to stay longer, engage more, and then have a deeper dive into our websites and discover new content. And it increases the ability, if you're talking about, what does this mean for my business, the ability to cross-sell and upsell. So they might come for one thing, and because they're having such a good experience and they can find things quite easily, they'll discover other products and figure out other solutions to the original problem they visited your website for. And that means obviously higher conversions and sales, which is the bottom line for why we're doing all of this anyway. So that's why it's quite important. In terms of the search signals I mentioned earlier, let me just, I'm just trying to minimize my camera while I can see the screen yet. So let me just take a deep dive into this then. So Google search signals for page experience. So again, search signals help us improve rankings. So part of this is called safe browsing. So safe browsing means if you've ever logged into Google Search Console, which is a free platform that tells you about the health of your website, it might give you alerts if your website has been flagged for spam, or if there's questionable downloads associated with your website, or if your website has been hacked or is at risk of being hacked. So all of these things come under the safe browsing category, and Google wants to make sure your website is safe for other users so that it can trust you well enough to rank you in the search results, or even rank you at all, let alone higher or lower than competitors. The other thing we're going to look at, and we'll look at all of these in detail in a sec, mobile friendliness. Obviously, is quite self-explanatory. So how well does your website display on mobile devices and tablet versus desktop? HTTPS, which is basically how secure is your website, and by secure we mean how secure is the data going to and from the user back to the server, and vice versa. So is that data secure? Are they comfortable with submitting personal details in forms, for example, or doing monetary kind of actions on your website? And non-intrusive interstitials. So basically the pop-ups, and I'll show you some examples of them. You probably come across them daily. From a SEO perspective, they can obscure key content that you've landed on a web page for initially, and so that basically ruins the whole user journey. And then what we're going to focus on later on is core web vitals. So that's all important in under the banner of page experience, which are all search signals or ranking signals. So taking a look at each of these then. So safe browsing, as I mentioned, I'll give you some dates as well. So from roughly 2007 onwards, Google started openly saying that it took these things into account. So if your website was associated with malware, harmful downloads, or had deceptive pages, tricked people into clicking on links to then download software that wasn't deemed safe, and they started to actively find ways to pick up on that and report to you. And a lot of times people weren't aware that their websites are associated with these actions. So it started to report these in Google Search Console and openly talk about it in its blogs and forums. These are issues. This is how you can fix them. Because obviously that's kind of when people started to get clued up with deceiving people a bit more, and the technology was there for any Tom, Dick, and Harry to kind of do that. Another issue is mobile friendliness. So this gained a more official prominence from Google, mentioning it in 2015 onwards. And particularly in 2015, around April time, Google released an update that affected all websites whose mobile versions weren't considered user-friendly. And that would include loading slowly, not displaying right. As you can see in that example, on the left, there's a desktop version of a site that's appearing on mobile, which is obviously hard to see and navigate through, versus the good example on the right, which is the website that's responded to that change in device. So like the nerds that we are in the SEO world, the blogs named it Mobilegeddon. There's a kind of a arguably cool name for all of these algo updates. Yeah, it took a big hit, and a lot of people woke up to mobile friendliness at that point. Page experience again, so HTTPS, that was a big deal, and Google officially started talking about this around 2014 and 15, and then 2016 it implemented an update again to say if your website isn't secure and it's dealing with sensitive data, then it will consider ranking you lower against your competitors. So again, it's trying to look at security, and it deems secure sensitive content as basic form fills and submitting your email address to mailing lists, as opposed to what you might have in mind, which is like entering your bank details and stuff. So it's got a broad definition of what secure data is, which is fair enough, but that's just an important point to mention if you're thinking, I don't really need to do that. Most websites are secure now anyway, so that's less of an issue these days. And unintrusive interstitials. So there's two examples there. Obviously, the bad one, and it's quite common even on popular websites and publications. You'll land on a page straight away, and straight away you'll see a pop-up that obscures the whole content that you were there to see in the first place. So a lot of times people just will exit without even reading that promotion. It might even be a good promotion. So poorly implemented pop-ups, whether it's adverts or paid ads or general pop-ups for like mailing lists and things like that, they're a big deal, and Google started to figure out how to track them and then award you if you didn't kind of obscure people's visibility in that way. So I've added links to each of these updates that Google itself spoke about, and it gives you specific details on how to get around them. So all of those things happen before. They're all part of page experience, and they're all ranking signals, so they're really important to take note of. So now we're going to look at Google's mobile first index. So obviously we need to take a step back if you're not familiar with Google's index and explain what that is in the first instance. So what is indexing in Google? So essentially, indexing stands for basically saving things on a server, on Google's server. So it's database. So we're saving websites that Google discovers. So just to take you through the process of how this happens. So Google crawls your website in the first instance. So it uses what it calls a Googlebot or a spider. And this is essentially a program that goes from web page to web page, following URLs, links between these pages. So picture your navigation, your site navigation, lands on your home page, and it uses the links in your site navigation to discover all the pages that exist on your site. And then it basically builds a picture of all the pages, and it makes a quick decision then on whether to initially store your web pages. So if the pages are deemed safe and there's sufficient content on there that make them seem valuable, and there are some other factors as well, it'll make a quick decision and store your pages in its index, its database. It will then make another decision when someone searches for a keyword that's related to your website. So picture your website is stored on this database, someone searches for a keyword related to you guys, it makes a quick decision via its algorithm as to whether that keyword is relevant to your website and if your website is good enough to display to the user. Because what I mentioned earlier with all of those different, search factors, it'll look at, is your website mobile friendly? Because this person is searching on mobile. Is this website, has it got any harmful content? Is it safe for safe browsing? Is it secure? So if the website ever asks you to submit your email address or even more data, or you're comfortable doing that, and things like page speed, does it load quickly? So there are a lot of factors that it looks at, and then it will display your website. So there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of work that goes on in between these steps here. And we do a lot of that work in the SEO department. So we make sure websites are crawlable in the first instance, they get stored, and then the index. We, basically when the Google applies this index, we're on its good side and we're ticking all those boxes and we're able to appear for all related searches. So looking at mobiles for the mobile first index in a bit more detail. Obviously, most websites these days are visible across most platforms now. Developers are really good at doing this in the first instance versus maybe 5 or 10 years ago. So I just wanted to introduce a couple of examples and use these throughout the next few slides. So we've got a mobile version and a desktop version of the Annika site. So on the left, that's quite obvious. We've got more space to work with. So that's typical desktop view. And then on the right, we've got the truncated mobile view where it's nicely responded to that size change. So just to go through the history of Google's mobile first indexing in terms of the algorithm updates it's told us about. So prior to 2018, Google predominantly looked at the mobile version of your site to figure out whether to rank you high or low in the search results. So whether you were searching on mobile or desktop, it focused mostly on the mobile version of your content. So basically everything it could, Google bot, its program could see in the wider mobile view, if it was all perfectly visible there, say, okay, so it assumed it would be perfectly visible on mobile. So from March 2018, that changed, and Google started to say, look, we've found a way to obviously use the algorithm to figure out how to make people make websites more responsive for mobile devices. And so it started rolling out what's called its mobile first indexing algorithm. So your mobile content affected rankings directly and indexation. So if you've got websites that were built prior to this update, you might have gotten away with still ranking relatively high. This is why the desktop icon is still, in there. But for all new websites, it was trying to focus mostly on the mobile version of that site and judge where you should rank based on how that looks. And that obviously improved in the following update as well. And just a caveat to this, these are all updates that Google has told us about or confirmed after SEO's sort of flagged up changes in ranking positions. There are hundreds of updates that have happened before all of this and in between all of this that we don't know about. So, these aren't kind of big events that are happening by themselves. There's constant updates happening, but these were deemed quite significant to kind of address by Google. So July 2018 onwards, it focused mostly on, so it said basically mobile first indexing is now the default method for all new websites built. So any new website built after this point, you're going to rank high and low depending on how you look on mobiles. The websites that were built prior to this time, you could still sort of get away with ranking high and low. But to be quite honest, at this point, Google was figuring out basically, okay, we need to find a way now to apply this algorithm to all websites, not just the ones that were built after we started applying this index. So this is essentially what happened in March of this year. So Google said that we are now officially 100% mobile first in the way that we judge and rank websites. So regardless of whether your site was built recently or 5 or 10 years ago, you are now being judged on your mobile user experience predominantly. So this was a big impact for websites that had separate domains for their mobiles versus their desktop sites. They had to, particularly those guys, had to get their act together and figure out how to build a responsive website on one single domain, so that it looked good on mobile as well as desktop. So that update was quite a big deal. It was, a lot of SEOs were fully aware of this, especially since the last 5 years. So it wasn't a massive shock. But if anyone didn't do any work, people didn't do any work prior to that, then they would have had a big shock, essentially. So just going through some rationale now as to why mobile first is important. So there are some obvious points on here. So I've thrown in a couple of stats. So on the left, we've got a trend of mobile users for the last few years. And obviously that trend is increasing, which is quite an obvious point. So if you look at all different types of industry geared towards, from technology to browsers, and how sophisticated those have become and more readily available, then that trend is going to continue to increase. And that's what the right graph shows us. So there's a forecast of mobile users from now to the next few years. And we can see that trend increasing. And so obviously with, Samsung flagship phones updating sometimes twice a year, that's kind of the crazy rate that we're going on accessibility on mobile, and obviously higher speeds with 5G coming in. So it's super important to pay attention to this, and most developers are really good at taking all these things into consideration. I'm going to go through what these things are, which are basically technical actions on how you can appeal to and appear in the mobile first index. So I'm going to go through a few kind of suggestions that are tried and tested on how you can appear in mobile first index. So if you haven't done all these already, implement a responsive web design. So that's a pretty obvious point, and I'm just trying to illustrate that by showing the Anika website. And what I've done in my browser as a simple example is I've resized it to, how it looks on tablet and then how it looks on mobile. Obviously not to scale, but you can see basically, it's responded quite well, and the navigation has changed from a horizontal navigation to a hamburger, what we call a hamburger menu that pops out to user space effectively, and then the search bar has gone away, and as we've responded it, the search bar has moved a bit to the left, and the menus dropped down for tablet users. So this is typically how a website responds or should respond. So the second main point is make sure that Googlebot can access your site. So there's a few techie notes on this that I don't need to go into in super detail. So if you're not overly technical, you can refer to your developer or technical SEO consultant on how to implement these. So just an overview of these solutions. So we mentioned Googlebot is a program that's trying to find your pages in the first instance, let alone apply an algorithm and make a decision to show it to people secondly. So use the same meta robot tags on your desktop and mobile site. So if you have a different meta tag on your mobile site, especially the no index tag, for example, or no follow, that tag tells Google to not see these pages. And for whatever reason, people still use these tags in this way. So Google may fail to crawl and index that version of your site. So we need to basically make sure that it's visible across all devices. There's a technical term that I'm going to use called lazy loading, which is essentially delaying the loading of certain elements of your page so that a user doesn't notice that. So picture landing on a web page and you see a big banner and headline text and stuff. Before you scroll down, there are a lot of other elements that might be loading in the background without you noticing it, and that's called lazy loading. So it's a delayed loading of all that stuff because you don't need to see that straight away. So the suggestion here is you can use lazy loading, but don't use it if it's based on user interaction. So if you need to load some elements on below the page where you scroll based on a user clicking on something or even scrolling, don't do that, because if we remember Googlebot, it's a program that's trying to replicate a user experience and browse through your pages and discover all your pages, but it's not a user, so it's not going to know to click on something to load the rest of the content. So Google's recommendation is, we're not Skynet, we're not sophisticated yet, so don't load content based on a human user interaction. Don't block Google from crawling your content, the content on your site. So sometimes there are separate resources on mobile devices or desktop that are blocked for whatever reason. Different URLs on mobiles for certain pages or sections on your site, or you might have a blog that's on a mobile version. So again, you might do a disallow, what's called a disallow directive, which is basically Google don't look at this content on mobile. It's a kind of an obvious point, but a lot of people still do this, so we advise against that. Make sure your content is the same on desktop and mobile. So this seems like an obvious point, but if you've ever resized a web page and continue to read content, you might notice that content might have changed completely. There might be a different version of that page, or the content's not visible in the same way that it was on desktop. So you need to make sure that your site contains the same content. But what you could do is, if you run out of real estate and you've got a long form blog post, for example, or something complicated and with call to actions and images and stuff, you can use what's called CSS and JavaScript to style these elements in a way that when the browser reduces size, elements move accordingly. So if there was a button that would end up all the way at the bottom of the page, you can use JavaScript to say, actually move this a bit higher, because the user's not going to see it if they're on a smartphone versus a tablet. So there's different things you can do to your content to manipulate its position, or to basically show as much as possible in that small screen. Check the placement of your ads and promotional pop-ups as well. So I mentioned this unintrusive interstitial point earlier. Let's just call it pop-ups. So a lot of those pop-ups are made up of paid ads, adverts. So they might appear pretty good on your desktop and not obscure a lot of the content, but you might forget to think about how it looks on mobile devices. And a lot of times those ads don't resize, so they just appear even bigger and block most of the screen. So on the left example, you've got an ad that still kind of obscures content a lot, but then on mobile obscures it entirely. So there's ways you could get around that. Again, I mentioned CSS and JavaScript. You can resize things to the point where, it just looks like a small banner on mobile devices, and you can still see about 70% of the text on the page. These are ranking signals as well. I have to keep kind of referring to that. These affect how high or low you're ranking Google if you get these right. So I've just summarized some of the takeaways that you can kind of go to with web developers and your SEO consultants. And these are the things that we would look at as well as solutions. There's a more complete list of solutions from Google, and I've added a couple of tools for you to test whether you are mobile friendly and will appear well in the mobile index. These are all things that we include in our technical audits as well. So these are things that we can do as standalone audits or as part of a bigger audit, looking at all the things in this slide deck, plus a lot more. So we took a deep dive into the page experience, broadly speaking, and mobile first. So we're going to look at core web vitals now. So referring back to that table that Google showed us when it announced all of these updates. So amongst all of these other search signals or ranking signals, core web vitals is one of the big ones there. And it's Google's attempt at basically trying to quantify what makes a good user experience. So if you think about all the different, annoying things that you come across when scrolling on a website on mobile, things moving around when it loads, big pop-ups, slow loading time, and inability to kind of click on anything because stuff is still loading and processing. All of these things were previously quite hard for Google to quantify, because it's, as a human, you can tell this is annoying for several reasons because you can see everything going on. But for a program like Googlebot and Google's index, it's quite difficult. So it has now started to quantify all these elements, and it's divided them into loading, interactivity, and visual stability. So you don't need to remember a lot of the technical acronyms for these, but just to kind of reference them. So loading comes under this term called largest contentful paint, or LCP. And this essentially means the biggest bit of content or groups of content that loads on the site first when you land. And then we're looking at interactivity, which the acronym they use is first input delay, or FID, which is basically the soonest point that you can interact and click on something. So in real world, that will mean maybe a top banner or the menu or a search bar or something. And then we're looking at visual stability, which is kind of categorized as cumulative layout shift, or CLS. And this refers to that point I made about when you're waiting for something to load and an element moves out of the moves position on the last second when you're about to click on it. So a picture being on a publication site, clicking on an article, moves out the way, you click on the wrong article. So that's an example of that. So again, techie alert, I'm going into a bit more detail. And I'll try and relate this to kind of real examples. So sticking with LCP, or largest contentful paint, this is basically how long it takes for the page's main content to load. Google recommends 2.5 seconds or faster. So if you think about the largest thing on a website, you probably think it's a banner or the menu, but it could also be stuff that you don't see in the background. So stuff below, what we call below the fold, below the point where you scroll down. There might be some interactive animations, or another menu structure that uses JavaScript and CSS, and that might be the biggest thing that lands on that loads on your page without you noticing. So these are the things that developers and SEOs figure out. What's the biggest thing that's taken ages to load, and how can we fix it, and fix it in a way that the user doesn't notice? First input delay, or FID. This is how long it takes for the content to become interactive. So Google recommends this time to be less than 100 milliseconds, or 0.1 seconds, basically. So the time's a bit shorter than LCP, the largest thing to load, because users typically want to start clicking around and interacting with stuff, even when stuff is loading. So, there's even less time to work with. That's why the scale's a bit lower in milliseconds. And then cumulative layout shift. So this is the amount the layout or content shifts while loading. So we already referenced that example. So Google has its own metric for that, and it's used a fractional score of 0.1 seconds at 0.1 or less. So it's not a time score, it's just a figure there. So it's figured out a metric on how to kind of tell how to quantify what a good and bad layout shift is, and it essentially doesn't want any. So that was a bit heavy in terms of technical phrasing and that, but if you just picture the actual real world examples, you can kind of gauge how well your website is doing in these categories. But when we're auditing this as SEOs and developers, we rely on tools to do that, to basically figure out what the biggest problems are based on, and then we look at how much resource do we have to fix these, and we work through what's the easiest to fix, right, going down to difficult stuff. And the best way for us to do that is to use real world data. So I'm just going to go through some tools that Google have provided, and I'll go through the distinctions. So there are field testing tools, which are essentially tools that are based on real anonymous user data, where they've basically gone on web pages and said, this takes this long to load or interact with. So against all those scores that we showed, there's real data saying this is a good score, this is a bad score. But there's also lab testing tools, which is based on synthetic lab data, which is like an estimate of where these scores should be, or what's a good score and bad score. And the reason why there's two sets of tools is because you can't get all the data just from field testing. Developers are making changes in real time. Therefore, lab testing tools give you an instant result and more detailed, updated data as well. So we recommend using a combination of field tools and lab tools throughout the process of diagnosing and fixing issues. So the first typical port of call that we recommend is logging into this free platform that, if you're not familiar with, called Google Search Console. So in this tool, there is a section for page experience and a specific report for core vitals, and it'll tell you how many pages are affected by which specific issue. And this is based on real data and real anonymous data as well. So you can log into that straight away. And if you don't have an account, it's easy to sign up, and we can kind of help you do that if you want. The next tool, which is quite useful, is a standalone tool that audits page by page, and it's called Google PageSpeed Insights. This uses a combination of field data and lab data that I'll show you in a bit. This is a good one that we use as well, because it gives us a proper breakdown of all the different elements affecting load page, and interactivity and CLS, and suggestions on how to fix that. And then there's another tool that is pure lab data, because it's using your Google Chrome browser. And within Google Chrome, you've got a developer tool set. If you're not familiar with it or ever seen it, in the background, there's a lot of audit tools within Chrome, and one of them is called Lighthouse. And within Lighthouse, it will test page by page how the page scores on these metrics, and it'll even give you a breakdown of all the different elements that are loading quickly or slowly and how to fix them. So those are only three of several tools as well. I just wanted to keep it simple for this presentation. Just a quick example then. So this is Google Search Console, and within that you can find a section called Page Experience, and then within that there's also a report called Core Vitals just below that. So here's a couple of examples of where you can navigate and what those reports look like. And I just wanted to bring up some real world examples of these tools as well. So the next tool is obviously PageSpeed Insights. This is what a report looks like again. PageSpeed Insights uses a scoring scale of 0 to 100, and it gives specific guidelines of what is a good and bad score. And the other tool, Google Lighthouse, when you're in the developer section, on the left there, you see Lighthouse in that top menu option there, and then all those options are already pre-clicked for you. So all you could do is click Generate Report, and when you do that, it will run a local report based on lab data, not real world, but it's still very, very valuable, good data there. So just going to show you some examples of websites getting it right and getting it wrong. So I've used an example of wish.com and currys.co.uk. So sorry, just trying to get rid of a pop-up. So I've used a couple of examples just to show two extremes of a really good website and a really low scoring website. And just a caveat to these, just because you get a super low score, it doesn't mean in the real world it's a really bad user experience. You know, sometimes there are certain things that inflate or deflate the score, if you like people using their mobile devices and mobile data to search for certain things. So just to keep in mind, people on 3G or 4G will have a poorer experience than people using Wi-Fi. But this is a nice broad example. So I ran a test on both of these, and the high scoring one was wish.com, which scored 99 out of 100 for Core Web Vitals. So if you want to do this, you can go onto Wish and Currys and see for yourself how they load and how things shift around and stuff, and if you have a general good experience on them. The low scoring one's obviously Currys, and I'll show some examples of why it's low scoring in a bit. So yeah, it's scoring quite low for some of these issues. So it does well for first input delay. So you're able to interact with stuff straight away, which for me personally and a lot of users, I guess, is the main thing. Like if you are waiting around, at least you can perform the action you were going there for. If it was just looking at one thing, like say one product on Currys, for example. But then it doesn't score that well for first content for paint. And there's a few new metrics in there as well. So cumulative layout shift as well, and LCP. So I'll just go into them in a bit more detail. So this is the low scoring website, Currys. And there's a few more details as to how poor these are performing. So largest contentful paint is taking about 13.4 seconds. So there's obviously an element or several elements on that page that are taking quite a while to load. So after having a quick look myself, I could tell it was things like it was product lists, it was large banner images, and there was a lot of large JavaScript files loading in the background as well. So there's a collection of things that were causing the score to go really low there. And then total blocking time, which I haven't mentioned yet. So total blocking time is is essentially contributes towards how long it takes for you to interact with stuff. So if you think of you make a request on a page to click on something, or did a search for a product, or you're just loading the page, there's a request going to the server to get this content, and then that content's coming back, but that content is then getting processed by your browser. So it's saying this content's got styling and this, that, and the other. So the browser's trying to spit that out into something visual on the page. So during that process, your ability to click on and interact with the page is being blocked. So that's essentially what that means. So yeah, I won't explain every single metric, so I might go over my time. But for your reference, here are the other metrics involved in this particular test on page speed insights and the specific scores that this particular website got. And here's some explanations as to what they mean in more detail. I've mentioned some of them before already. And for a further reference, here's the good and okay acceptable scores for these little metrics. So sticking with that same tool as a good example on Currys, as you scroll down that tool, you can see suggestions on how to improve those metrics. And Google is quite good at suggesting useful things, but in a broad way. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. Remove unused JavaScript, eliminate render blocking resources, save images in next-gen formats. So these are all broad suggestions. They're not always right. So what we do is when we do our audits, we use this tool and we use other tools as well. And we test using Google Chrome developer tools. And we figure out what specific elements are contributing towards these issues. And are these issues actually the main thing, stopping it from loading and being interactive and all of that stuff? So we're always comparing different data sets with our actual own user journey as well on the pages. And we will basically figure out, okay, this group of pages is mostly affected by this issue where you've got JavaScript files that are too long and there are some like redundant files that we can just delete. And then another group of pages might be simply these images are too big. Let's resave them, using a plugin or Photoshop, and see if that reduces the score. So there's loads more to this, but this is a really good starting point. Again, there's more suggestions on that right screen there as well from Google. So I've sticking to the time. I think we're doing all right on that. So we've been auditing this for a few months now, since Google first mentioned it actually, and we've come across with some common issues and solutions as well. So I just wanted to share those. These are in some really popular SEO case studies as well. So there are a lot of SEOs that I've come across, and developers especially have come across common issues and solutions. So I'll just list a few of them now. So I'm relating back to the core vitals, LCP, largest contentful paint, and FID, first input delay. There are some solutions that are quite common in fixing both of these issues. So one of them is implement browser caching. So this has been a solution to a lot of things since websites first started, basically. And it essentially means when you revisit a web page, having visited it in the first instance, your browser has saved all of the important content like banners and menus and even text content itself. And so the next time you visit it, having already got that stored locally, the page takes way less time to load. So that's a real quick solution to page load speed, for example. Large high quality images is a common issue. And the common solutions for that is to firstly try to reduce the file size of the existing images while maintaining their quality. And you can do that by, if you're on WordPress or HubSpot, by using specific plugins to do that. One of the examples is compressor.io on WordPress, which is quite popular, and you can configure it in a way to maintain the quality while automatically reducing the file size. That's the usual first port of call. And then the next one is what Google suggests is save your files in next gen image formats. So if you picture your images are currently saved in, say, JPEG or PNG, which is quite high, the next step to optimize an image size is then go with a different format. And Google have worked quite hard to, in collaboration with other with developers, to come up with a better file format that still maintains high quality but takes lower file size. So WebP is another kind of good example. I rarely have to resort to using a different file format, but I believe we have done it a couple of times, and it's worked quite well. Implement HTTPS. So I mentioned way back at the start, one of the search signals was a secure website. The other byproduct of using HTTPS is it uses a protocol called HTTP2. It's a type of connection to a server which allows you to transfer more data. So picture a motorway that's got more than 2 lanes, basically. So there's more traffic going back and forth. That's what HTTP2 is. Again, faster speeds. Optimizing scripts. So wow, that time went quick. So let me just kind of do this as soon as possible. So optimizing scripts. So as I mentioned, JavaScript and CSS can take quite a lot of file size. There might be a lot of JavaScript that you don't actually need to use. So, the recommendation is remove any unnecessary scripts that ain't being used or old, but still being called to the browser. Minify, so actually crunch the script so that it's using lower file space. So, anything that's spaced out too much in the script itself, you can delete spaces and delete entries in those scripts as well. And also you can delay or defer the loading of certain scripts as well. So if you don't need a particular type of JavaScript to load initially because it does something that the user won't see unless they scroll lower or do some kind of action, you can delay that. And there's a couple of examples of how you can do that. So you can use a trigger in Google Tag Manager called window loaded that will basically delay the loading of that script until the page is firstly loaded. And then there's a plugin called WP Rocket that'll help you do this as well. So just conscious of going over technical and obviously over time. Set up lazy loading. So I mentioned before, lazy loading is good. Don't do it when the loading depends on if a user clicks on something to trigger the loading of the rest of the content. So it's really good to use, but make sure you do it like, set it from a timed perspective. So this stuff loads in, 5 seconds instead of 1 second, for example, because the user's not going to see it until they scroll down the page anyway. Improve the speed of your hosting service. So I've added this close to the bottom of the list because we tend not to have to resort to optimizing speed from the server level. Usually on-page changes does the job. But there are some instances where you might need to look at your hosting company and say, is this server quick enough for the level of users and interaction we're getting? So you might have to make that decision and use a content delivery network or CDN. So again, if you've got a large website, picturing an e-commerce website that's applicable across the globe in different countries and that, you might have someone accessing your site in America and your server is based in the UK, so it takes a little bit longer to get to them. A CDN places the website server closer to their location, so they get that version loaded to them as opposed to the one across the globe. Just quickly then, just going to go through the CLS fixes. So this is where your content moves around as the page is loading. One of the main fixes is to define the space that the content needs to fit into so that when the content's loading, it loads into a space that's being held for it rather than you seeing a header and some text, and then that text moves down when that image loads in there, for example. So this is one popular example from Google to kind of reserve space already. I've actually jumped a suggestion because that's the second one. The first one is really easy, which is define sizes for your images and elements. So that's the width and height of them. That's a really quick fix you can do, which ensures that that image stays the same kind of dimension and it doesn't move around too much. Avoid loading any new content above existing content. And slow CSS and JavaScript optimization, so improve the optimization of those files. So I've had to be a bit brief with those, but I've added links to all of these with detailed suggestions, and we can talk further about specific suggestions for your website if it's not meeting core vitals. So just to recap, optimize all of these elements. These are all search signals, and these will help you rank higher. And I'll just leave it at that. Apologies, but I haven't left a lot of time for Q&A, but I've relied on Brad to kind of help answering questions throughout. I'm not sure if you want to join back, Anne. Here you go. So I think she's controlling in the background. So we've got a couple of special offers for these technical solutions. So one of them is Google Analytics 4, the latest version of Google Analytics. It's really in depth, and there are a lot of reports on there and improvements that can help you just reports on your website. So my colleague Brad is offering a special offer on this, you can see. And there's also a special offer on Core Web Vitals audit that we can do for you. So there's a couple of prices. So £150 plus VAT for a one-off audit of Core Vitals, £500 plus VAT for GA4 setup, or you can do both for £550 and save £100.
Hi guys, I don't know whether you can hear me. There's a few internet problems. Can you still hear me, sir?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay. I just put the offer up. Did you see it?
Yeah, so I was just talking through that. I don't know if you wanted to reiterate that.
Okay. Yeah, so basically what we've done is create a blog post with the offer. There's two elements to this. There's the audit for the Core Web Vitals, which is what Sukh's been talking about. And if you want to do that just on your own, that's £150. In addition, Ed's added in the G4 setup, which we talked about in January, and that's £500. And if you want to do both, then it's £550 for both of them. I've just spotted a typo. The other thing I was going to do was quickly show you next week's webinar. That's with Tom, and it's an interview with a local business leader, Karen D, who's got a really interesting business, textile business in Leicester. There's a really bad echo, I do apologise. And if you're interested in clicking through and booking a place on that one, I'll just send that now. So hopefully if you just click on that, that will open another browser. And then the final thing, I guess, really is from Sukh's perspective. Have you answered all the questions for everybody?
So I'm just answering a question as well. Yeah, Ismay, we can look at image dimensions. You can pull them up in a tool called Screaming Frog, or right click and expect element in your browser, or we can help you do that. There's several ways you can do it. It's quite easy to look at your image dimensions and edit them in the code in HTML.
Excellent. Well, I'm sorry I've not been much help to you this morning. As you can imagine, I've still got workmen outside and I'm still checking by my phone. The internet connection is rather slow. But I hope everybody's enjoyed the presentation. I thought it was really easy to understand, as I'm not as technical as Sukh, and there seems to be lots of nice comments. But what we'll do is we'll release the video later on. And if anybody's got any questions, Sukh's put his email address in the text there as well. And you'll put the video on this afternoon.
Yeah, please drop me an email. Apologies, I didn't leave any more time for Q&A at the end. I was relying heavily on Brad. Sorry, Brad. But yeah, it was quite dense, so I was trying to get through that. Please drop me an email if you have any further questions.
And if you think that the presentation was really helpful today, please do leave Sukh a nice review. We've actually updated it at last. So you can see a few months ago, we had as many reviews. So We really do appreciate the reviews that you've been leaving us, and the comments are great. So thank you very much for that, guys. Excellent. Okay, well, have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll see you next Friday. Hopefully, I won't have the same internet problems that I've currently got, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you, sir.
Guys, bye. Thanks, Anne.
Bye-bye.